My name is Emily, and I'm 34 years old. For 8 years, I was married to Michael, a successful investment banker with a charming smile and a secret life. We had what everyone called the perfect marriage in our beautiful Victorian home. Then I found the text messages, the intimate conversations with a woman named Natalie, the plans they had made together. So while he was on a business trip with her and her family, I made a decision that shocked everyone, including myself. I sold our house. Before you hear my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to make a difficult decision to stand up for yourself. Trust me, this story has an ending you won't expect. I met Michael at my college roommate's wedding 10 years ago. He was the best man, tall and confident in his tailored suit, with a smile that lit up the room. I was immediately drawn to him, not just because of his looks, but because of the way he listened when I talked. Really listened with his full attention, asking questions that showed genuine interest. It was refreshing after dating men who seemed more interested in impressing me than getting to know me. Our connection was instant. We danced all night at the reception, and by the time he asked for my number, it felt like we'd known each other for years instead of hours. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant in Boston, where we talked until the staff started stacking chairs around us. By the third date, I was already imagining a future with him. Michael worked for a prestigious investment firm while I was teaching third grade at a public elementary school. Our worlds were different but complementary. He would tell me stories about corporate mergers and market fluctuations, and I'd share funny anecdotes about my students. We balanced each other, his ambition and drive matched by my patience and nurturing nature. After 2 years of dating, Michael proposed during a weekend trip to Cape Cod. The ring was stunning, a princess-cut diamond that must have cost 3 months of his salary. The wedding that followed was straight out of a magazine, 200 guests at a vineyard in Martha's Vineyard. Me in a designer gown that made me feel like a princess, Michael beaming with pride as I walked down the aisle. We bought our house 5 years ago, a gorgeous Victorian with 5 bedrooms in Beacon Hill, one of Boston's most exclusive neighborhoods. It had hardwood floors, crown molding, a gourmet kitchen, and a garden that bloomed spectacularly in spring. The price tag was staggering, nearly $2 million, but Michael had just received a substantial promotion and bonus. "We deserve this," he said as we signed the mortgage papers. "This is our forever home." I loved being a teacher, but as Michael's career accelerated, he started traveling more frequently. Chicago, New York, San Francisco. Sometimes he'd be gone for a week at a time. After much discussion, I made the difficult decision to step back from teaching to support his career and manage our home. It was supposed to be temporary, just until his travel schedule calmed down, but somehow temporary turned into permanent. Our social circle consisted mainly of Michael's colleagues and their spouses, other successful, ambitious couples who seemed to have it all figured out. We hosted dinner parties where the men discussed market trends while the women compared interior decorators and vacation destinations. I played my part well, but sometimes I felt like an actress in a play about someone else's life. As the years passed, I began thinking about starting a family. I was approaching my 30s and the large house felt empty with just the two of us. But whenever I brought it up, Michael would say, "Not yet, Em. Let's wait until things settle down at work." There was always a reason, a potential promotion, a big client, a market shift. The timeline for someday kept stretching further into the future. On the surface, we had the perfect life, the kind that makes people sigh with envy on social media. The beautiful home, exotic vacations, charity galas, and formal wear weekend brunches at exclusive clubs. But beneath that glossy exterior, cracks were beginning to form. Michael was physically present less and less, and even when he was home, he seemed distant, his mind elsewhere. I told myself it was just the pressure of his job, that all marriages go through phases, that things would improve once his career stabilized. I ignored the growing knot of loneliness in my chest, the way I'd started talking to myself just to hear a voice in the empty house. The way I'd begun to feel like a beautiful accessory in Michael's successful life, rather than a partner. Little did I know that the perfect life I thought we were building was already crumbling beneath my feet. I can't pinpoint exactly when things began to change with Michael. It was subtle at first, the kind of changes you can easily explain away when you're not ready to face the truth. He started working later, his urgent client meetings stretching past dinner time more frequently. The affectionate texts throughout the day dwindled, replaced by brief functional messages about schedules and household matters. His phone became an extension of his hand, and he'd take calls in another room, his voice lowered. When I'd walk in, he'd quickly end the conversation or switch to discussing obvious work topics. New passwords appeared on his devices. Just security protocol from work, he explained with a casual shrug that seemed just a little too rehearsed. The business trips to Chicago became more frequent. Once a month turned into twice, then weekly. "We're expanding the Midwest division," he said. "The CEO wants me personally involved." It made sense on the surface. Michael was good at his job, trusted by the higher-ups. Why wouldn't they want him handling an important expansion? But then came the small inconsistencies. A receipt for a woman's scarf from a boutique in Chicago fell out of his suit pocket when I was sending it to the dry cleaner. "A thank you gift for my assistant," he explained. Another time I found a charge on our credit card statement for dinner at an expensive restaurant on a night he'd told me he was having room service because of a late meeting. When I questioned these discrepancies, Michael would become defensive. "Don't you trust me?" he'd ask, making me feel guilty for doubting him. "You know how demanding this job is. Do I need to account for every minute of my day?" And because I loved him, because I wanted to believe him, I would back down, apologize even for my suspicions. There was a particular evening last winter that should have been my wake-up call. Michael had told me he was in New York for meetings, but when I checked our shared location app to see if he was back at his hotel I was planning to call him, I saw he was in Chicago. When I texted to ask about it, there was a long delay before he responded with a complicated explanation about a last-minute flight change that the admin hadn't updated in his calendar. I mentioned this to my best friend Sophia during our weekly coffee date. We'd been friends since college, long before I met Michael, and she knew me better than almost anyone. "Emily," she said carefully, setting down her cup, "I don't want to plant ideas in your head, but something doesn't add up. You need to pay attention." I defended Michael, of course, made excuses, told Sophia she was being dramatic, but her words lingered and I began to pay more attention. I noticed how Michael would step out of the room when certain calls came in, how he'd shower immediately upon returning from trips, how he'd become vague when discussing the details of his work in Chicago. The moment of truth came on a Tuesday evening. Michael was in the shower after returning from a 3-day trip to Chicago. His phone left on the kitchen counter lit up with a message notification. I had never been the type to snoop, had always respected his privacy, but something, intuition perhaps, made me glance at the screen. The preview showed a message from someone named Natalie. "Last night was amazing. I can still feel your hands on my body. Can't wait to see you again tomorrow." My hands trembled as I picked up the phone. There was no passcode. He must have disabled it temporarily while at home, forgetting to reactivate it in his post-trip exhaustion. I opened the message thread and began scrolling, each text a knife to my heart. "Miss you already. The apartment feels empty without you. One day we won't have to hide. When are you going to leave her?" The messages went back months, revealing an affair that had been going on for over a year. There were intimate photos, plans for their rendezvous, complaints about having to maintain the charade of our marriage. In one message, Michael had written, "Soon, I promise. I just need to figure out the right timing. Emily will be devastated." At least he had that part right. I was devastated. But more than that, I was furious. Not just at the betrayal, but at myself for ignoring the signs, for making excuses, for allowing myself to be fooled for so long. I heard the shower turn off and quickly replaced the phone exactly as I'd found it. When Michael emerged wrapped in a towel and humming to himself, I greeted him with a smile that felt like it might crack my face. "Good shower," I asked, amazed at how normal my voice sounded when my entire world had just imploded. Great, he replied, kissing my cheek absently before heading to the bedroom. I didn't confront him that night, or the next day. A cold, calculating part of me I never knew existed decided that more information was needed before I made my next move. Michael had been meticulous in his deception. I would be equally thorough in uncovering the full extent of his betrayal. Once I knew what to look for, evidence of Michael's double life was everywhere. It was as if a veil had been lifted and I could suddenly see what had been in front of me all along. I started with his emails, waiting until he was asleep to use his laptop. He'd left himself logged in, another careless mistake from a man who thought his wife too trusting to ever check. The correspondence between Michael and Natalie was extensive. She worked at the Chicago office, a financial analyst who had joined the firm 2 years ago. According to the emails, they'd met during a company retreat and had been inseparable ever since. There were messages arranging meetings, discussions about their connection, and plans for their future together. Most shocking was the discovery of an apartment lease in Chicago. Michael had rented a one-bedroom place in an upscale neighborhood nowhere near the company's office building. The lease was under his company's name, presumably filed away as a business expense, but the emails made it clear this was their love nest, not corporate housing. Next, I found photos, hundreds of them stored in a hidden folder on his cloud account. Michael and Natalie at restaurants and parks, on what appeared to be weekend getaways. The intimacy in these images was undeniable. The way they looked at each other, touched each other. There were even photos of them in bed together in what I recognized as the Chicago apartment from other pictures. The woman who had been sleeping with my husband was beautiful in a polished corporate way. Young, perhaps 28, with straight blonde hair, sharp features, and an ambitious glint in her eye that reminded me of Michael when we first met. In many ways, she looked like a younger, more career-focused version of me, and I wondered if that was deliberate on his part. Not trusting myself to uncover everything, I hired a private investigator. It was easier than I expected. A quick Google search, a consultation, a deposit. The PI was a former police detective named Diana who specialized in infidelity cases. "I'm sorry you're going through this," she said during our first meeting, "but you're doing the right thing by getting all the facts before you decide how to proceed." Diana's report confirmed everything I'd already discovered and added painful new details. Michael and Natalie had a routine. Dinners every Wednesday at an Italian restaurant near the apartment, weekend brunches at a cafe around the corner. They'd taken trips together. Weekend getaways to Michigan, a week in Montreal, 3 days in Miami, all disguised as business travel on Michael's calendar. Credit card statements revealed more secrets. Jewelry purchases, designer clothing, spa days. All gifts for Natalie charged to our joint account. I calculated that over the past year, he had spent nearly $30,000 on her, money that could have gone toward the family we were supposedly saving for. The most shocking discovery came from Diana's background research on Natalie. She had a family in Chicago, parents and a younger sister who lived in the suburbs. According to Diana's surveillance, Michael had spent holidays with them when he'd told me he was working. Thanksgiving last year, when he'd claimed to be closing a critical deal with Asian investors. Christmas Eve, when he'd called me crying about being stuck in New York due to a snowstorm. He had been building a whole alternate life, complete with a potential new family. I found emails discussing their future, how they would eventually tell everyone about their relationship, how they would handle the fallout from our divorce, even tentative wedding plans for after our marriage ended. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when I discovered Michael's upcoming business conference in the Bahamas. It was a 10-day trip, scheduled for the following month. According to emails between him and Natalie, this was actually a vacation with her and her family, parents and sister included. Michael had booked a luxury villa with multiple bedrooms and had been coordinating activities with Natalie's father for weeks. My emotions during this investigation phase were chaotic. There were nights I cried until I was physically ill. Days when rage burned so hot I could barely function. Moments of humiliation so intense I couldn't leave the house, convinced everyone knew what a fool I'd been. I lost weight, couldn't sleep, found myself staring at the walls of our beautiful home, wondering if any of it had ever been real. But beneath the turmoil, something was hardening inside me. A resolve. A determination. Michael had methodically constructed his betrayal over the course of a year or more. He had lied to my face daily, spent our money on his lover-made plans to discard me when it became convenient. And now, armed with all this knowledge, I decided it was time to take control of the situation. Not just to walk away, but to do so on my terms. Michael had underestimated me, had assumed my trusting nature made me weak. He was about to learn how wrong he was. With a complete picture of Michael's betrayal in hand, I knew I couldn't simply confront him and file for divorce like most would expect. That would give him time to hide assets, craft a narrative that minimized his affair, and ultimately control the dissolution of our marriage. No, I needed something more decisive, something that would make it clear that I was no longer the naive wife who could be manipulated and lied to. I started by consulting with a divorce attorney, not one from the social circles we frequented, but a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Valerie, who had a reputation for handling high-profile divorces with discretion and ruthless efficiency. During our first meeting, I laid out everything I had discovered and asked about my options. "The affair gives you leverage," Valerie explained, "but Massachusetts is a no-fault divorce state, so legally it won't impact the division of assets much. However," and here she leaned forward with a gleam in her eye, "there are other ways to ensure you're protected." I asked about the house specifically, our most valuable joint asset. "It's in both your names," Valerie confirmed, reviewing the documents I'd brought. "Well, technically, either of you can sell it with proper documentation. But typically, both parties would need to sign off." "Typically," I repeated, noting her careful word choice. Valerie smiled thinly. "There are ways to facilitate the process if you have power of attorney. But I should warn you, any dramatic moves could be contested later." "I'm not concerned about later," I said. "I'm concerned about now." With Valerie's guidance, I developed a plan. I contacted a real estate agent who specialized in luxury properties in our neighborhood. Jackie was enthusiastic about listing our house, assuring me that the market was hot, and we could expect multiple offers above asking price, especially if we priced it aggressively for a quick sale. "How quick is quick?" I asked. "With the right price point and marketing, we could have offers within days and close within 2 weeks if the buyer can pay cash," Jackie said. "But that's unusually fast. Most sellers want time to find their next home move out gradually." "Fast is exactly what I need," I told her. While these wheels were turning, I had to maintain the facade of normalcy with Michael. It was the hardest acting job of my life. Smiling over dinner, asking about his day, listening to his lies about the upcoming business conference in the Bahamas. Each night I lay beside him in bed, staring at the ceiling, mentally cataloging the items I would take and those I would leave behind. I needed Michael's signature to move forward with my plan. Valerie had prepared power of attorney documents that would give me the authority to handle the house sale. The trick was getting him to sign without reading carefully. I created a cover story about renovations, something we discussed vaguely in the past. I gathered quotes from contractors' design magazines and sample materials, creating a convincing portfolio of a home renovation project. Then one evening, as Michael was rushing to pack for a quick overnight trip to New York, I presented him with several documents that needed signatures. "It's just the paperwork to start the kitchen renovation we talked about," I explained, shuffling the power of attorney form between contractor agreements. "The designer needs authorization to access the property while we're both at work, and the contractor needs approval to order the custom cabinets before prices increase next month." Michael, distracted and hurrying, barely glanced at the papers. "Do we really need to do this now? I'm going to miss my flight." "The designer can only schedule us for next month if we submit everything today," I insisted. "It'll just take a minute." With a sigh of impatience, Michael scrawled his signature across all the documents, including the power of attorney form. "Happy now?" he asked, already turning away to grab his suitcase. Very, I said, and for the first time in months I meant it. The next phase began as soon as Michael left for his Bahamas trip. He texted me from the airport with his usual travel message: "Boarding now. Will call when I land. Love you." Each word a lie typed out of habit rather than feeling. The moment his flight status showed departed, I called Jackie. "I'm ready to list the house," I said. "As soon as possible." The listing went live that afternoon with professional photos Jackie had arranged earlier in the week under the guise of a market evaluation. The asking price was 15% below market value, a deliberate strategy to attract immediate attention and multiple offers. Within 24 hours, we had 11 offers, all above asking. 3 were all cash with minimal contingencies. I selected the highest of these, a tech executive relocating from California who was willing to pay $100,000 over asking for a 7-day closing with no inspections. While the sale was being processed, I went into overdrive. I hired a moving company and storage facility, explaining that my husband and I were separating and I needed to move quickly and discreetly. I packed my personal belongings, family heirlooms, and sentimental items. I took half of our joint assets, artwork, furniture, electronics, but was methodical about documenting everything to show the fairness of the division. For Michael's possessions, I packed his clothes, personal items, and the things I knew mattered to him: his college sports memorabilia, the watch his grandfather had given him, photo albums from before our relationship. These went into a storage unit I rented in his name, with the first 3 months paid in advance. I left specific items behind in our bedroom for dramatic effect. Printed copies of incriminating emails between him and Natalie, photos from the PI's surveillance credit card statements, highlighting his expenses on her, and the lease for the Chicago apartment. All neatly arranged in a folder on his bedside table, where he couldn't possibly miss them. The week passed in a blur of activity. Closing documents were signed by me with my newly acquired power of attorney, final walkthroughs, completed utilities transferred. I found a small apartment across town under my maiden name and set up mail forwarding for both of us, his to the storage unit, mine to my new address. The wire transfer for my half of the proceeds, just over $900,000 after paying off the mortgage and closing costs, landed in my new individual bank account on day 8 of Michael's 10-day trip. I had already transferred half of our joint savings and investment accounts as well, leaving meticulous records of all transactions to demonstrate I had taken only what was rightfully mine. As a final touch, I installed a small discreet security camera at the front of the property, positioned to capture the moment of Michael's return. Not for legal purposes, but for my own closure. I needed to see his face when he realized what had happened, when he understood that I was not the passive, predictable woman he had taken for granted. With everything in place, I left our keys with the new owners, checked into my apartment, and waited for Michael's return. According to his itinerary, he would be landing the next afternoon. I had sent him a single text message: "Hope you enjoyed your trip. We need to talk when you get back." His response had been casual: "Looking forward to it. Bringing you something special." I wondered what something special would be. A trinket from the Bahamas to appease his guilt, jewelry to distract me from his extended absence. Whatever it was, it would never reach my hands. The house where he planned to return no longer belonged to us, and the wife he thought would be waiting was gone. The day of Michael's return, I sat in my new apartment laptop, open to the security camera feed, a strange calm settling over me. After the frenzy of the past week, this moment of anticipation felt almost surreal. I had done everything I could to prepare, had executed my plan flawlessly. Now, all that remained was to witness the consequences. According to the flight tracker, Michael's plane had landed on time. Allowing for baggage claim and the drive from the airport, he should be arriving at the house, the former house, within the hour. I made myself a cup of tea and waited, watching the empty driveway on my screen. At precisely 4:17 p.m., a taxi pulled up. Not Michael's usual town car service, which surprised me momentarily until I realized he probably had company. Sure enough, the camera captured Michael emerging from the vehicle, followed by a blonde woman I recognized as Natalie, and an older couple who must be her parents. There appeared to be a fourth person, a younger woman who resembled Natalie, likely her sister. They were laughing, relaxed, vacation-tanned. Michael was directing the driver regarding their luggage with the easy authority of a man accustomed to being in charge. He hadn't told the others about our house. That much was clear from their casual demeanor. This was to be a grand reveal, the confident introduction of his mistress and her family to his impressive home. I imagined him saying, "My wife is away visiting her parents," or some similar lie to explain my absence. The moment they approached the front door was when confusion first registered on their faces. The door had a new smart lock system. The previous owners had removed our traditional keypad and installed their own security setup. Michael tried his key, then tried again, frowning. He stepped back, looking up at the house as if seeing it for the first time. There were already subtle differences. The new owners had removed our seasonal wreath from the door and replaced the doormat. The security camera had been installed where our decorative sconce once hung. I watched as Michael pulled out his phone, presumably to call me. My phone buzzed on the coffee table beside me. I declined the call. He tried again. I declined again. Then came a flurry of text messages. "Emily, are you home? Something's wrong with the door. The key isn't working. Did we change the locks? Where are you? Call me ASAP. Emily, this isn't funny. I have guests with me." I didn't respond to any of them. On screen, I could see the growing confusion and tension. Natalie was speaking to Michael, her expression concerned. Her parents looked uncomfortable, the father checking his watch repeatedly. After several more attempts to call me, Michael approached a neighbor who had come out to collect her mail. Though the camera didn't capture audio, I could imagine the conversation. The neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, who had always been friendly but not close, would be explaining that we no longer lived there, that the house had been sold the previous week to a nice family from California, that she had assumed we were both aware of the sale given the moving trucks and the paperwork. Michael's body language transformed before my eyes. His shoulders tensed. His gestures became agitated. He was pacing now, running his hand through his hair, a habit when he was extremely stressed. Natalie and her family huddled together on the sidewalk, their vacation joy evaporated. I saw Natalie attempt to touch Michael's arm, but he jerked away, still frantically trying to call me. After about 20 minutes of this chaos, during which I imagined Michael was calling our friends, possibly his lawyer, maybe even the police, a car pulled into the driveway. The new owners had arrived home. More awkward conversation ensued, with Michael gesticulating wildly while the new owners, a couple in their 40s with 2 small children, stood their ground politely but firmly. Finally defeated, Michael herded Natalie and her family back into the taxi, which had been waiting with their luggage still inside. They pulled away, Michael's face a mask of confusion and rage visible through the rear window. My phone exploded with messages and calls after that. I let them all go to voicemail instead, sending a single text with the address of the storage facility and the unit number where I had placed his belongings. I included the access code and information about the 3 months of prepaid rent. I also mentioned the envelope he would find inside with the divorce papers and copies of the evidence I had gathered. His response was immediate and explosive, a series of messages alternating between rage, disbelief, and desperate attempts to explain. According to Michael, Natalie was just a colleague who needed mentoring. Her parents were in town and wanted to see a typical American home. The trips, the gifts, the apartment, all had innocent explanations that I was too suspicious to understand. When these justifications failed to elicit a response, his messages turned pleading. He loved me. He had made a terrible mistake. Natalie meant nothing to him. We could work through this. We could go to counseling. He would do anything to fix our marriage. I didn't reply to these either. Instead, I contacted Natalie, directly sending her a brief factual message with selected pieces of evidence attached, enough to make it clear that I knew everything had proof of everything, and that Michael had been planning to leave me for her all along. "I thought you should know who you're really involved with," I wrote. "A man who spent our 10th anniversary with you while telling me he was stuck in meetings. A man who used our joint funds to rent your apartment and buy your gifts. A man who promised you he would leave me soon while assuring me we were saving for a family. Make your decisions accordingly. The aftermath played out across social media and through mutual friends over the following days. Michael's carefully cultivated image as a successful, devoted husband crumbled as word spread about his double life. Several of his colleagues at the firm distanced themselves, particularly those with spouses who had been my friends. His family, who had always been kind to me, reached out to express their shock and support. Natalie's reaction was swift and definitive. According to a mutual connection at Michael's firm, she requested an immediate transfer to their London office and broke things off with Michael completely. Her family, apparently horrified to learn they had been participating in an affair, wanted nothing more to do with him. Professionally, the scandal didn't ruin Michael, but it certainly tarnished his reputation. The firm valued his financial acumen enough to keep him, but he was quietly removed from client-facing roles for a period. The polished, trustworthy image he had built was compromised, and in the finance world, perception matters almost as much as performance. Through all of this, I maintained my distance and my silence. I didn't engage in public discussions about our marriage or his infidelity. I didn't post cryptic messages on social media or seek sympathy from our social circle. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my life with the resources I had secured and the freedom I had claimed. The satisfaction I felt wasn't about revenge, though many assumed that was my motivation. It was about reclaiming my power, about refusing to be the passive recipient of Michael's decisions about our life together. For years, he had been in control of our finances, our social circle, our future plans. In one decisive action, I had shifted that balance entirely. But beyond the practical implications, there was an unexpected emotional benefit. I had thought I would feel devastated for months, maybe years. Instead, I felt a profound sense of liberation. The beautiful house that had increasingly felt like a gilded cage was gone. The marriage that had become a performance rather than a partnership was over. The constant anxiety of trying to be good enough, perfect enough, worthy enough of Michael's fidelity and attention had evaporated. In its place was something I hadn't anticipated: the exhilarating possibility of creating a life that was authentically mine. In the months following what my friends started calling the Great Escape, I experienced a profound transformation. The initial shock and adrenaline gave way to quieter, deeper changes. I had defined myself as Michael's wife for so long that rediscovering my own identity was both terrifying and thrilling. The first step was practical, establishing my new life logistically. The proceeds from the house sale gave me financial security and options I might not have had otherwise. After setting aside money for taxes and legal expenses, I invested the majority conservatively, creating a safety net while I figured out my next steps. I decided to use some of the money to travel, not to escape, but to reconnect with myself. For 3 months, I explored places I had always wanted to see but had postponed for various reasons. Michael had preferred luxury resorts and established destinations. I discovered I loved small towns in Portugal, hiking trails in New Zealand, and food markets in Thailand. I traveled alone, making decisions based solely on my own interests and instincts, a freedom I hadn't experienced in years. During my travels, I kept a journal, something I hadn't done since college. Writing about my experiences helped me process not just the betrayal and its aftermath, but also the gradual reawakening of my own desires and perspectives. I realized how much I had subjugated my own preferences to maintain harmony with Michael, how I had gradually diminished myself to fit into his world. When I returned to Boston, I felt ready to rebuild more permanently. My first decision was about my career. Teaching had been my passion before I set it aside for Michael's convenience. Now, with time to reflect, I realized I still loved education, but wanted to approach it differently. I enrolled in a master's program in educational policy and leadership, with the goal of effecting systemic change rather than returning to the classroom. I also reconnected with family members I had drifted away from during my marriage. My cousin Rachel, who Michael had always found too loud and opinionated, became a regular visitor to my new apartment. My Uncle Steve, whose modest background and direct manner had made Michael uncomfortable, became a trusted advisor as I navigated my investments and future plans. Perhaps most surprisingly, I found support from unexpected quarters within our former social circle. Sophia had stood by me from the beginning, of course, but I was touched when Maria, the wife of Michael's colleague, reached out. "What happened to you made me take a hard look at my own marriage," she confided over coffee. "The way you handled it, with such dignity and strength, it inspired me to address issues I've been ignoring for years." Similar conversations followed with other women from our former life. While some had distanced themselves, seeing me as a cautionary tale or taking Michael's side, others sought me out, curious about the woman who had so thoroughly upset the status quo of their carefully ordered world. Dating again was a daunting prospect, but after 6 months I decided to try. The first few attempts were awkward. I had forgotten how to talk about myself without referencing Michael, how to evaluate compatibility on my own terms. There were uncomfortable dinners with men who seemed perfect on paper, but sparked no connection, and promising starts that fizzled when the novelty wore off. Then I met James at a fundraiser for the educational nonprofit where I was interning as part of my master's program. He was a science teacher at a local high school and a widower with a quiet confidence that immediately put me at ease. Our conversation flowed effortlessly, touching on education policy, travel, and our favorite authors without a single awkward silence. Our relationship developed slowly, deliberately. James understood grief and renewal in a way few others could, having lost his wife to cancer 5 years earlier. He was patient with my trust issues, never pushing for more than I was ready to give. We established healthy patterns from the start: open communication, respect for each other's independence, shared decision-making. As my personal life stabilized, my professional aspirations crystallized as well. My experience in the classroom combined with my new academic knowledge gave me a unique perspective on educational challenges. I began developing a consulting model to help schools implement more effective teaching strategies for diverse student populations, particularly in underserved communities. What started as a capstone project for my degree evolved into a viable business plan. With encouragement from my professors and initial interest from several local schools, I launched a small educational consulting firm. The work was challenging and deeply satisfying, allowing me to impact more students than I ever could in a single classroom. With my new career gaining traction, I felt ready for another significant step. Using a portion of my savings as a down payment, I purchased a modest but charming 3-bedroom house in Cambridge. It was nothing like the grand Victorian I had shared with Michael. Smaller, less prestigious address, more character than luxury, but it felt more like home than that showcase ever had. I painted the walls in colors Michael would have found garish, filled the bookshelves with titles he would have considered lowbrow, and planted a vegetable garden in the backyard, rather than the ornamental plants our landscape designer had insisted upon. Every choice reflected my preferences, not a carefully curated image meant to impress others. Throughout this period of rebuilding, Michael made several attempts to reconnect. At first, his messages and calls were angry, accusing me of overreacting, of humiliating him, of being vindictive. When those got no response, he shifted to remorse, elaborate apologies, promises of change, references to our history together. The final phase was the most difficult to resist: nostalgia and selective memory. "Remember our trip to Santorini," he would write. "Remember how happy we were when we first moved into the house." These messages came in moments of vulnerability, late at night on anniversaries after I'd posted something on social media that suggested I was moving on. I maintained my boundaries firmly but not cruelly. I responded only to practical matters related to our divorce proceedings, which were moving forward despite his initial attempts to delay. I didn't engage with his emotional appeals or attempts to rewrite our history. The woman who might have been swayed by such tactics no longer existed. The divorce was finalized 14 months after that fateful day at the restaurant, the legal end to a relationship that had emotionally concluded much earlier. Michael made one last attempt to meet in person, suggesting coffee to get closure. I declined politely but firmly. My closure came when I sold the house, I wrote. I wish you well, but our paths are separate now. It was true. I had found my closure not in confrontation or conversation, but in action, in the decisive choice to value myself enough to walk away completely. The life I was building now wasn't a reaction to Michael or a temporary holding pattern until something better came along. It was intentional, authentic, and entirely mine. The contrast between my past and present couldn't have been more stark. The perfectly appointed house had been replaced by a home that actually reflected my personality. The social obligations had given way to genuine friendships. The constant performance of being the ideal wife had been abandoned in favor of being a real, flawed, growing person. When I heard through mutual connections that Natalie had eventually left Michael for a senior partner at the London office, I felt nothing but a vague sense of inevitability. Whatever relationship they had built had been founded on deception. It was hardly surprising that it couldn't withstand scrutiny and consequences. As for Michael, rumors suggested, he was dating again back in our old social circles, presenting a carefully edited version of our divorce that cast him as the victim of an unreasonable wife. I found I didn't care. His narrative no longer had the power to affect me or define my story. The woman I had become, strong, independent, purposeful, could never again be contained in the narrow role I had once accepted. And for that transformation, paradoxically, I had Michael's betrayal to thank. A year after selling the house, my life had taken shape in ways I never could have imagined during my marriage to Michael. My educational consulting business, initially a small venture with just a few local clients, had grown to serve schools across Massachusetts. I had hired 2 associates, former teachers with complementary expertise, and we were making a real difference in how schools approached curriculum development for diverse student populations. My home in Cambridge had become a genuine reflection of myself, comfortable, colorful, alive with plants and books and music. I had converted one bedroom into a home office and another into a guest room that my nieces used regularly during weekend visits. The kitchen, far less grandiose than the one in the Victorian, was actually used for cooking, rather than just showcasing expensive appliances. My relationship with James had deepened naturally without the artificial timelines or social expectations that had characterized my courtship with Michael. We spent weekends exploring New England's hiking trails, attended education conferences together, and had animated discussions about everything from classroom management techniques to the best way to prepare risotto. It was a partnership of equals built on mutual respect and genuine compatibility rather than appearances. One unexpected development came in the form of a brief email from Michael. It arrived on what would have been our anniversary, but contained none of the emotional manipulation or nostalgia of his previous attempts to communicate. Emily, I've spent a year reflecting on what happened between us. I was wrong, not just about the affair, but about how I treated you throughout our marriage. You deserved better, and you were right to leave the way you did. I got exactly what I deserved. I won't contact you again, but wanted you to know that I understand now. Michael. I never responded, but the acknowledgement provided a strange kind of closure. Not because I needed his validation, but because it confirmed what I already knew, that my actions, while dramatic, had been justified. That standing up for myself, refusing to be discarded on someone else's timeline, had been the right choice, not just for me, but for my own self-respect. I heard through mutual friends that Natalie had indeed left Michael for another colleague, just as he had planned to leave me for her. There was a certain poetic justice in that outcome, though I took no pleasure in his pain. Whatever karma had delivered to Michael was his, to process, not mine to celebrate or mourn. My focus remained firmly on the future I was building. The educational nonprofit where I'd interned offered me a position on their board, recognizing the unique perspective I brought as both a former teacher and a consultant. I accepted, grateful for the opportunity to shape educational policy at a broader level. James and I continued to build our relationship thoughtfully, enjoying the present without rushing toward any particular milestone. When he suggested moving in together after 18 months of dating, It felt like a natural evolution rather than a box to check. We decided to start fresh selling both our places and buying a charming colonial that we renovated together, each room a collaborative project that respected both our tastes. My friendship circle had evolved as well. Some relationships from my married life had fallen away, casualties of the divorce and the social realignments that followed. Others had surprised me with their loyalty transcending the circumstances that had initially brought us together. And new friendships had formed, with colleagues, with parents at the schools where I consulted, with neighbors who knew me only as the person I was, now not as an extension of Michael. The most significant change, however, was internal. The woman who had once measured her worth by her husband's approval, who had shrunk herself to fit into someone else's vision, who had accepted subtle diminishment as the price of belonging, she was gone. In her place was someone who understood her own value, who made choices based on her own desires, who recognized that true security came not from a prestigious address or a socially advantageous marriage, but from self-knowledge and self-respect. I still had moments of doubt, of course, times when the old insecurities would surface, when I would question my decisions or compare my life now to the material comforts I had left behind. But these moments grew less frequent and less powerful as time passed. The confidence that comes from rebuilding your life on your own terms is not easily shaken. One afternoon, as I was preparing materials for a workshop at a struggling inner-city school, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was a reporter from a local education magazine interested in featuring my consulting work in an article about innovative approaches to curriculum development. "What made you transition from classroom teaching to consulting?" she asked during our interview. I considered the politically correct answer, something about wanting to have broader impact, about seeing systemic issues that needed addressing. All true, but not the whole truth. Life took an unexpected turn, I said instead. I found myself at a crossroads where I had to decide who I wanted to be and what really mattered to me. Teaching had always been my passion, but I realized I could channel that passion in new ways that aligned with who I was becoming. "And who was that?" the reporter prompted. I smiled, thinking about the journey of the past 2 years. Someone who understood that ending one story can be the beginning of a better one. That sometimes the most difficult decisions lead to the most authentic life. That we're never too old or too established to start over if the life we've built no longer serves who we truly are. The article, when it was published, focused primarily on my educational methodology, but included that quote. I received dozens of emails in response, from teachers, from women going through divorces, from people of all kinds who found themselves at similar crossroads. Their messages reinforced what I had come to believe, that my experience, while personally painful, contained universal elements that resonated with anyone who had ever needed to reclaim their power and redefine their life. Looking back now, I can see the selling of the house for what it truly was, not just a practical maneuver in a divorce strategy or an act of revenge against a cheating spouse, but a powerful symbolic reclaiming of my agency. In that single decisive action, I had transformed from object to subject, from reactive to proactive, from Michael's wife to simply Emily. The house had represented everything about my marriage that was beautiful on the surface but hollow underneath. Selling it was my declaration of independence, my refusal to wait passively for Michael to determine the timeline of our separation. It was the moment I decided that my life would be guided by my choices, not by someone else's betrayal. If there's a lesson in my story, perhaps it's this. Sometimes the end of what we thought we wanted creates space for what we truly need. Sometimes losing what we believed was essential reveals strengths we never knew we possessed. And sometimes the most profound act of self-love is the courage to walk away from what no longer serves our highest good. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision that ultimately led to personal growth? Or found yourself rebuilding after betrayal? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to support more stories of resilience and transformation. And if you know someone who might need to hear this message of hope after hardship, please share this video with them. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, The end of one chapter is always the beginning of another. Your best story might still be waiting to be written,